Hello, Feminine Roadmappers. Welcome back to Feminine Roadmap Podcast, the podcast that helps you navigate the challenges and the changes of midlife and live a more vibrant second half. Today, if you find us on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell. If you're on a podcast platform, please rate and follow me there. Today, we're going to be talking about the importance of cellular health. My guest is understanding of the concept of cellular wellness and how it applies to every area of our health. He has gained an awareness of an uptick in illness, and he wants to offer solutions that are possibly outside of what we understand now, but things that are more natural and supportive to our bodies. My guest today is Dr. Bill Rawls. He is a doctor, the medical director of Vital Plan, and the author of the Cellular Wellness Solution. Bill, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. I would love to get an insight into what led you to this mission and message. What is your journey here?
Yeah, it was a crazy journey. I graduated from medical school and was just infatuated with delivering babies. I thought it was just the coolest thing, bringing life into the world. So I specialized in obstetrics and gynecology, and I liked it because it dealt with people who were younger, healthy, and wanted to stay that way. And it was less oriented toward treating chronic illnesses with pharmaceutical therapies. And it was just really wonderful bringing a baby into the world. Mm-hmm. The downside of that was that in a small town, I was required to take hospital call every second to third night. You know, I was on call I had to not only work in the office, but for a 24-hour period, I was on call for labor and delivery or any emergencies that came in, and I traded off with my partners with that. But typically that meant not sleeping or sleeping very little. Every second, third night, every second to third weekend, Friday till Monday morning, if you can imagine that. Mm-hmm. And that balancing community and being a dad and husband and all of those things, what got shorted was sleep. And after 20 years of that, my body just fell apart. But so I was forced to stop doing obstetrics at that point at around age 47. But I just didn't get better. Even stopping call, recovering the ability to sleep, my body was just falling apart. Cardiovascular symptoms, neurological symptoms, and I identified with fibromyalgia just because nothing fit. Mm-hmm. I finally found I was carrying some of the microbes associated with Lyme disease. So that led me to identifying with chronic Lyme, treated with antibiotics, got worse, and finally embraced herbal therapy as kind of a desperate solution and gradually got well and rebuilt my life around this new concept of wellness. And I've been healthy now for 20 years and still taking herbs all of that time. So after going through all that, there was this, why did the herbs work? What was going on here? What is chronic Lyme disease? And it brought me to a new understanding, not of just that illness, but chronic illness in general, looking at the cellular level and this relationship that we have with microbes throughout our lifetime. And so those principles, I built principles that really can be applied to any situation, whether it's a chronic illness or whether it's something like midlife changes with menopause. So through that course of that, I was still doing gynecology. And I went from, in residency, I was using the standard pharmaceutical preparations for hormone therapy and that sort of thing. Pretty quickly got away from that and started using bioidentical therapy and then later herbal therapy. So it really totally changed my approach to my practice of gynecology in the same respect. And it's been an interesting journey.
You know, you're actually not the first doctor I've talked to who had kind of an unsolvable health issue round about that same, 40s, and had to step outside of the training, the medical training and understanding that she had. And it's an interesting story because I feel like I understand the structure of the medical system. I understand that they have their controls over, diagnoses and the protocols for those diagnoses, but it is not 100%. And there are a lot of gaps in that process. So I really appreciate that I'm sorry that you suffered, but I really appreciate that you took that suffering and found a solution that can help other people who are in that same position of not being able to be well. And I think our wellness is so important.
Yeah. Well, oddly, I wouldn't trade the experience for anything. It changed my life. It was like it opened up my eyes to this very, very different way of seeing that's so important that conventional doctors, they just can't go there. And being forced outside of that comfort zone and being forced to consider things in a different way, to consider all other possibilities. Wow. And it's just really, it's given me purpose. It's affected my life in so many positive ways. And I've been able to use that and help so many more people than if I had stayed with those conventional routes. So in some ways, yeah, I mean, nobody wants to go through something like that, but in some ways I consider it a blessing.
I'm interested to talk through when you talk about herbal therapies, because I think a lot of people, it's an unusual topic for them. I think you either know about it or you know nothing about it. It feels like this is a topic that is all or nothing, so I'd love to have you explain to us when you talk about this cellular wellness. Maybe we could start there. When you say cellular wellness, what exactly are you saying to us, and what does that mean to our health?
Yeah, it's we don't think about things that way, and looking about how I was trained, and how people talk about wellness or illness, they don't really think about the fact that, and it's really important, we are made of cells. All living organisms are made of cells. Everything that happens in the body, absolutely everything, is the function of cells. So if you want to understand something, break it down to its smallest functional unit, and that's a living cell. So whether it's your heart beating or thyroid hormone being produced or brain functions or functions in the ovaries, it's all done by cells. And every cell in the body has certain requirements. All cells in the body need the right nutrients, and that varies for different cells, but they still need a certain quantity of nutrients to function. They need a clean environment. So when we're exposed to all kinds of toxic substances, that inhibits cellular functions. It compromises our cells. Cells need good blood flow, chiefly from being physically active, to flush away toxic stuff and deliver those nutrients and oxygen. Cells need downtime. And certain cells, like our heart cells, rest in between beats, but most of our cells need a good night's sleep to recover from the stress of working all day. And all cells need protection from microbes. So, where I've come is that we have this very complex relationship with microbes in our environment, inside our body. And that's the greatest threat to cellular health. So if your cells are weak, then you're vulnerable to microbes. And here I'm not talking about just things that you would get like COVID. I'm talking about things that already exist inside your body that are just waiting for an opportunity. And if your cells are weak because you haven't slept for 20 years and you're not eating a good diet, and you're, all of these factors combined, then it just makes you vulnerable. And so I firmly believe there is a microbe connection with every chronic illness, even some you wouldn't expect, like endometriosis and things like that. I think it's there.
Before we hit record, I was using a word picture to kind of understand what I feel like midlife is health-wise. And I feel like we are at a fork in the road. Like we're in this place maybe between 45 and maybe even 65, where the choices that we're making, like maybe we've borrowed from our body bank for a very long time, like you did. And now you have nothing left to withdraw, or you're actually overdrawn on your energy and your health. And I feel like and maybe you can tell me if this is true physically. I feel like we're in a window where the choice that we make, we can either turn this ship around for those normal people who maybe haven't been as managing their health as well.
Yeah.
Or we're going to decline. Like, I feel like we can manage the aging process better in this little middle window by the choices that we make. Is that accurate?
Yes. Yes. And it is, whether you're male or female, that mid-lifetime, that time like from 45 on is pretty critical. And menopause affects us women by it's kind of the straw that breaks the camel's back, that things have been adding up for all these years come forth. And so let's talk about aging from a cellular point of view. People don't talk about it. They don't think about it that way, right? So we're made of cells, right? So we start out as basically one cell. A sperm and an egg come together to make one cell, and that cell divides, and the chemistry, the programming there inside our chromosomes tells that cell how to divide into all the other cells that make up our body. So we form, and from the time we're born to about age 20, we're in this accumulation phase that we're accumulating cells. So by the time we hit 20, we've accumulated 5 to 10 times more cells than we need to survive. And all of our cells are brand new. So at that point, that's the lowest risk of chronic illness. That's why we all feel invincible at age 20. In some ways, we really are. But after that point, we start gradually losing cells. And we lose our cells because they basically burn out their mitochondria. And, when we look at the science of, well, what do we do about aging? Fixing that is something that, it's like going against the laws of the universe. You're just not going to absolutely fix that one. So we lose cells. And so by the time most people hit 40, they've lost half their cellular reserves, and their cells have half the energy. That's why most professional athletes are done by the age of 40, because their cells don't have the energy anymore to do what they were doing at age 20. And that process continues. So at age 66, I have a whole lot fewer cells than when I started, but I'm in good health because I do the things necessary to keep my cells really, really healthy. So fewer cells, less energy, but I feel good and I don't have symptoms because my cells are healthy. But what's happening is we typically aren't taking care of ourselves like we should. We are taking liberties with diet. We're exposed to a lot of toxic substances. We don't get the rest we need. A lot of us, we don't get the exercise, all the things that we need to keep ourselves healthy. We're not doing that. And it really starts to show about age 45. So that's when it's like, yeah, you could get away with a lot because you had this cellular resilience up until that point. But, after that, yeah, it really starts to show. And that's when we start saying, maybe it's time I need to do something here. And so we start, working on our diet and getting more sleep and different kinds of things. But what I found over time is herbs can give you an edge. And that's where the herbs are so remarkably important.
I'm fascinated with herbs. I was telling you before we hit record that I actually have a book about these things. And your book, which is like an encyclopedia, is fascinating. For those of you on YouTube, you can see his book here. It's a nice resource about the different things. So how do people begin to use herbs, and how do they know what's safe for them? Because the information out there in terms of doctors trained in this is kind of limited, unless you're dealing with like a functional integrative medicine doctor who's chosen to include the herbal vein in their practice.
Yeah, and actually a lot of functional and integrative doctors don't know very much about herbs. It's kind of crazy. Even some naturopaths don't get much training in herbs. And I see that as herbs are probably the greatest force we have to protect our house over any single other thing you can do. And there are very specific reasons for that. So back to the book very quickly. Sometimes that description of an encyclopedia scares people away. I like to tell people that it's like 4 books. So the first book is like 100 pages, and it's that cellular wellness concept. The second book is a primer of everything that, just the functional things you need to know about herbs and how to get started. The third section is lifestyle, diet, all these things we need to do. And the fourth section, which is a really big section, is taking those concepts and applying them to specific problems like cardiovascular, menopause, etc. But, when I had this experience with herbs that I got my health back, I went into it thinking, okay, I'm killing this microbe associated with Lyme disease. And I came away after really researching it, understanding that that's not what chronic Lyme disease is. It's never an infection with one microbe. It's a spectrum of microbes. And when you look at chronic Lyme, it really is an example of how all chronic illnesses function. Different microbes, different tissues, but same principles. So I don't really use the concept of diagnosis the way that other doctors do. So with an herb, looking at this, I first went and, studied the traditional forms of herbology, traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, what was going on in Europe and North America. And it was very similar, and it was all observational. It was like, okay, if you have these symptoms, you take these herbs. But it really didn't tell me what the herbs were doing. And fortunately, over the past 20 or 30 years, there's been an absolute explosion of researchers around the world looking at what the herbs are doing on a biochemical level, looking at how the chemistry of the herb is affecting our chemistry and our cells. And that took me to a whole different place because I like science and I like things to fit logically. And that helped me understand herbs better than anything else. So what the herbs are doing is protecting your cells from all of those stress factors that I was talking about. So what you get with an herb is this complex chemistry that we call phytochemistry, plant chemistry. And that chemistry isn't just a bunch of random chemical things. It is the plant's defense and regulatory system. So the plant is using those chemicals to protect its cells and itself from free radicals, toxic substances, and microbes of every variety. But it's also using hormones, chemical messengers very similar to ours, to balance and restore normal chemical functions within the plant as a whole. So when we take an herb, we're getting all of that. And of course, plants are managing problems in different ways, and it depends on how a plant, what kind of stress factors it has in its environment. But it's creating these solutions, these chemical solutions, to protect itself from stress in the environment. And of course, some ways that plants do that don't really mesh well with our chemistry. In other words, some plants are poison. Nobody would make the mistake of eating poison ivy twice. But these things that we define as herbs are things that humans have been doing for literally thousands of years. So we understand that that plant's chemistry meshes well with ours. So when we take an herb, we are taking the plant's defense systems and regulatory systems. So it has the effect of protecting our cells against all those same factors, free radicals, toxic substances, microbes, viruses, bacteria, all of these things. But it also has the effect of balancing stress hormones and restoring normal balance. So that's the real magic of herbs. And so when you combine herbs, subtle differences between the herbs blend together. So you get this wonderful synergy that gives you a higher impact. It really helps you out quite a bit more. So when you're taking an herb, it doesn't really matter what symptom you might have or what might be going on in your body. It's going to help that because it's helping cells throughout the body. it's really interesting. I mean, early on, I was trying to learn, well, which herbs do you get for this symptom and this disease? And now I'm realizing, when you study it, you find that one herb, well, it may have been used to help the heart and the liver and all these different things. And it's like, well, yeah, the plants aren't selective. They're protecting every cell in the body. So it's this wonderful cell protection system. And when you look at it that way, it's not as complicated as it sounds. So when you use this basic assortment of herbs that I talk about in the book, you're affecting every cell in your body and every potential symptom. So instead of treating a symptom, you're promoting wellness. And I always say, you take herbs and they take a while to work because healing takes time. So what healing is the ability of our cells to recover from stress. So if we're reducing the stress, then our cells are naturally recovering. Well, that takes time. So I always tell people, give it a little time. But as you're taking the herbs, typically over months of taking them, the symptoms will gradually fade away. Not just one symptom, all of the symptoms in your body. And this thing of lasting wellness emerges. And it's really just wonderful to see that. And I've just watched it in myself and watched it in so many other individuals. It has so much power.
I think it's fascinating the way that you're explaining this, thinking about it's another organism with cells and its own natural function, and then our body and its cells and our natural function, and how they're symbiotic to each other, how they partner together. I think that's really fascinating. I know for me, let's say, for example, one herb that I came across called shatavari, when I didn't really know I was in perimenopause, but I can look back, hindsight's 2020, and shatavari was very helpful for me in those beginning stages when my body temperature wasn't regulated very well. And, and then I was doing bioidentical progesterone, but those are plants that I've only engaged with a couple of them, but they really did, like, to your point, it's the consistency of use and the time plus time, We're so used to a pharmaceutical mindset of take this, it's fixed, or it's band-aided, or whatever. So I love that you mentioned, and I just wanted to highlight it, the time, the lifestyle choices plus the time is necessary for healing to take place. And I just think that was a really profound thought. And I appreciate that you put it that way, because it's a shift in the way we think about wellness, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, it is. And a shift in the way we think about herbs. I think most people think of herbs as just weak versions of drugs, and it's like apples and oranges. So what we're doing with a pharmaceutical is blocking manifestations of illness, artificially blocking manifestations. So we're targeting enzymes, receptors, various kinds of chemicals in the body to block that thing from happening. And that can have value in reducing a symptom, but all it can do. So manifestations of illness, that what's happening, what the illness, what that cellular stress manifests as is symptoms, hormone imbalances, and inflammation. So we treat those things directly. We're treating the symptoms, and we do this for so many things in our society, that we treat the symptom, but we're not addressing the underlying causes. And there are no drugs that address the underlying causes of any chronic illness. So people don't get well. They end up in this state of managed illness. So what we're doing with the herbs is addressing that underlying cellular stress, which ultimately is going to solve the problem. So we don't really solve the problem with drugs. We just cover it up and suppress the symptoms of it. So we're actually solving the problem. And so it works very differently. So sometimes early on in an illness, blocking a process or a symptom can be really valuable to keep someone sane, comfortable, or possibly even keep them from dying. But if that's all you're doing, they're not going to get well. So the herbs will help that person restore wellness. And, we can look at any problem from that cellular point of view, and it's, so all cells in the body send and receive messages, but some cells in the body are specializing in that. Our adrenal glands, our thyroid gland, all of these different cells, those are functions that the cells are specifically producing chemical messengers. So our brain is the monitor. So our brain is constantly monitoring everything going on outside and inside the body, and it's sending messages through the hypothalamus and pituitary and thyroid and adrenals and ovaries to regulate all the cellular functions in the body. So if you have hormone imbalances, it implies that your cells are stressed. Not only just those glandular cells, but cells throughout the body. And the only situation that that doesn't apply is menopause. So what's happening in menopause is we lose the cells that produce estrogen. So every cell in the body has estrogen receptors. And if you pull that message away, then it disrupts functions, especially the hypothalamus, which controls appetite and temperature and weight and all of these things. It's regulating all of these cellular functions. Well, if it's getting bad feedback that estrogen isn't produced by the ovaries anymore, then that throws off the thermostat.
Mm-hmm.
So you end up having symptoms. So what herbs like shatavari and ashwagandha and vitex, there are a number of them, what they're doing is they have chemicals that are similar to the feedback chemicals coming from the ovaries and other parts of the body. So they help with just kind of soothing that hypothalamus to say, okay, it's not so bad. These just calm down, relax. So it helps balance those functions. And it also helps balance the brain. What the brain is going, oh no, something's going wrong. So because this hypothalamus is out of balance, well, if you balance those hormones with these key phytochemicals, then it just balances things out. So that symptom is better. Not to say that low dose hormone therapy and things like that can't be beneficial on top of that. But I always found in my practice, if I could get someone working on their cellular health, good diet, getting plenty of rest, just keeping their cells healthy and using herbs to balance some of that abnormal feedback, they were going to be a lot less symptomatic. And if we needed to use hormone therapies, we're going to be able to get away with a really low dose that isn't going to threaten their risk of breast cancer and other kinds of things that we worry about. And in the same respect, virtually every herb I've studied has anti-cancer effects. So if you're taking the herbs, you're protecting yourself from cancer too.
It's such a different science than we understand. Do you find that part of your work is helping people understand that they can trust this process and kind of weaning them off of the other?
I think that's why I was put on Earth and why I went through all these experiences, is so I could really explain these things. So it wasn't just that I went through this crazy experience. I've spent the past 20 years really studying the science. And again, if this had happened like 40 years ago or 50 years ago, the science wouldn't have been there. But virtually everything that I want to say, I can back up with good science, that there's a piece of science that supports that logic somewhere, all the way to the microbe theories, the way that herbs work, everything else. And the beauty of it is when you embrace that cellular model, you simplify everything. You make it so much more consumable that if you can think in those terms and think about, well, what am I doing to my cells instead of how do I get rid of this symptom? Then you really start, it puts you in a different place to move forward. And you understand why you need to change your diet and why you need to do certain things and how they're harming you at the cellular level, but also how herbs can protect you. All of these things are so remarkably important.
Now, we're talking about my audience, especially, is midlife and beyond. So we're already at that tapped out point where our cells are kind of like just in need of support. So is there a point, an optimal point, to begin to make these changes? Or is this something that no matter where you're at on the timeline of your life, that you can maybe reverse some of these negative effects from a life of maybe not good sleep, not good food choices, not good energy management choices? Is it always turnaroundable to some degree?
I never give up hope to anyone. All right. And it is, again, it's about cellular health. So during that decade or more that I was really struggling with chronic illness, and I had some pretty serious issues. I had cardiac arrhythmias and chest pain, and was on the verge of needing a pacemaker. I was functional as far as getting around, but I felt like I had a horrendous flu every day. I had a range of neurological symptoms. I mean, it was bad. And I thought at that point, now this was around 50, and I was going, I'm not going to be around very long. And as long as I am here, I'm not going to be well. And I burned a lot of cells during that time because of all the stress. There's no doubt about it. So at age 66, I've been pretty much symptom free. I mean, we all have little things that come up here and there, but I am doing things at age 66 that at 50, I thought I'd lost forever. I'm still doing things like kite surfing. I'm learning a new sport called wing foiling. And I didn't think I would be doing those things at this level. Now, granted, I don't do them with the same vigor I did when I was in my 30s, because, there's no doubt. It's like my heart. I reach a certain point that I know I just don't have the stamina to go over that. And I know that there are people at age 66 out there who do have much more capacity than I do because they never went through that stress. But so what that translates into is I burned a lot of heart cells. That's compromised. I'll never get them back. But my heart cells are healthy. My heart is healthy. I don't have any symptoms. And I can push pretty hard without having to worry about that. And so my day-to-day, I feel well and I go about life just fine, with a higher capacity than most people my age. So yeah, I can't regain a lot of those lost cells, but the cells that I have are healthy. Now, I'm pretty particular about my diet. I'm not horrendously particular about my diet, but I'm pretty particular. I am very particular about making sure I get sleep at night. I do stay physically active through the day. I'm very careful about my exposure to toxic substances as far as living with clean air and clean water and clean food. And I take a regular assortment of herbs every day, not to the volumes that I did when I was struggling with my condition. But I do take herbs every single day, and I think they give me a resilience that I would not have otherwise. So it's all about cellular health.
Yeah. I think that that our bodies are talking to us.
Yeah.
And I feel like one of the things that I had a thyroid thing happen, I didn't know it was a thyroid thing in my 30s. And I started paying attention to my body. I was trying to figure out, because the doctors are like, you're fine, you're fine, you're fine. I'm like, I am so not fine. I don't know what it is, but I'm not fine. Yeah. So I think there's a innate wisdom that we have in our own bodies when we learn to tap into it. to whether or not we are well, if that makes any sense.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm very tapped into what my body is doing, but also with other people too. I went through a phase that I was very much like most functional or integrative doctors. I was doing a lot of labs to try to assay what was going on in the person's body. And I found that the more I talked to the person, understood why their symptoms occurred in the first place. In other words, understand why they got ill. And then doing the detective work to define what those cellular stress factors were, I found that labs really didn't add that much. And I don't do a lot of labs myself. I get the routine things. But interestingly, at 66, my cholesterol is better and my blood sugar are better than when I was in my 40s. Just from doing these things, from protecting my cells, from keeping things working. And I haven't defied aging. I'm still aging and I'm going to continue aging, but the whole idea is aging without debilitating symptoms.
I like the way you put that. I think that's an interesting conversation, anti-aging. I've talked to a couple of people who really don't like the term anti-aging because, to your point, it is part of the natural process that we go through. I think the question is, how well can I age? And how can I maximize my resources, my personal, physical, and emotional, mental resources in order to go through that process with the least amount of struggle? That's how I see what they want, maybe say pro-aging. Because I feel like we're looking for this fountain of youth, and you've got these biohackers that are doing all these things. And do you do any biohacking things at all, or are you strictly working with this herbal protocol?
The herbs do the biohacking for me, right? So when we look at this anti-aging concept, you've got billionaires and all of these scientists out there that are looking for the magic bullet to fix aging. And every time I read some of these things, I just see huge flaws. And it's kind of like the hormone thing, should we be taking growth hormone and all of these different kinds? Should we be taking testosterone? And I'm looking at it and going, okay, these things are produced by cells and it's cellular communications. What hormones do is connect all the cells in the body, because cells, for us to function as a unit, all of our cells have to talk to one another, right? So that's a conversation that's very dynamic, and it's changing with every second that goes by, depending on what's going on around us and inside of us. So when we take a hormone, now it's a little different with postmenopausal hormone replacement, and we could get into that. But looking at other kinds of hormone therapies, what you're doing is throwing a monologue into a very dynamic conversation. The level of that hormone doesn't change. Even with thyroid, now we can get away with thyroid replacement as long as the person still has some thyroid function. But you take someone's thyroid gland out completely and try to replace thyroid, it's really hard, because that's constantly changing depending on what's happening in the body. So I always say your first best option is taking care of the cells that make up the glands that produce the hormones, so your body can continue that normal dynamic conversation. And then if that's just not working completely, in certain cases, especially like menopause, then some low dose hormone may be a benefit in certain rare cases. But that's not what people are doing. It's what people are doing is I relate it to an analogy of, like, if you've got a group of people that are trying to solve a problem and they're sitting around the table talking, and it's a dynamic conversation and they're working to figure out this problem, and somebody walks in, plops down a soapbox, stands up on it with a bullhorn, and starts screaming their message. It just drowns out that dynamic conversation. Well, when we give a high dose of a hormone, that's exactly what we're doing, and it can be extremely disruptive. So we have to be very, very careful in how we do that.
And our bodies are so different. And I think as you're talking about this fluctuation, I was developing Graves' disease. And so I was thinking it's food, it's this, it's that, because it seemed to be like I was nauseous after I ate. And it's like, I feel like this, I love how you use the analogy of a dynamic conversation. And I feel like the more in tune that we can become with our own bodies, the more we understand that conversation, like understanding what time exercise feels the best, what time, how many hours of sleep, or certain foods, how they impact you. Like, sometimes you can eat something and it's, you love it. And there may not be anything wrong with it, but somehow you feel either like heavy or tired, or, that dynamic conversation in my mind is going on in your body. And we're trying to pick up the phone and get involved in that conversation when we begin to pay attention to what it is our body is telling us. Now, you mentioned inflammation because you talked about hormones and you've talked about these other things. Now, inflammation is a huge hot topic right now. I see the word inflammation everywhere on social media and, of course, in my email box for my podcast. Let's talk a little bit about inflammation and what that is and what it does and what we need to do about it.
All right. There is a lot of conversation about inflammation, and doctors continually talk about inflammation. And I found very few people that actually know what it is. So give it a shot at it. What's inflammation? What do you think inflammation is?
Well, I don't have a great understanding, but to me, inflammation is when something's out of balance in the body and the defense system is rushing to protect. I think inflammation is your body telling you something is out of balance or something is wrong, but I'm not sure if I'm anywhere close.
You're in that right direction, but again, I've had very, very few people truly understand it, and I didn't for a long time. Nothing in my training taught me. It wasn't until I really sat down and researched it and figured out what it was. So what inflammation is increased die-off of cells in the body.
Okay.
And you can have a local effect, like if you twist your ankle, you've damaged tissues and cells in your ankle.
Right.
And what happens is those dead cells die and create debris. And that debris is congestion. So our cells are all kind of packed together. And so fluid has to leak out of our bloodstream to deliver nutrients and oxygen and carry away waste. Well, if you have a lot of debris and congestion there, that doesn't work very well, and cells start to suffer. So so all of your cells in that area become stressed. So on top of that, weakened cells are vulnerable to microbes. So what microbes want from us, bacteria, viruses, whatever, is food. And all living things are food for something else. Our cells, our tissues are food for microbes. That's why they want to get in our body. So what it turns out is we have dormant microbes in our tissues, in our blood, and they're just basically waiting. This is pretty new science. Only in the past 5 years, they're calling it the dormant blood and tissue microbiome. So these things are just there, and so you damage your tissues and you kill off these cells. Well, the immune system responds to that by sending in cells called macrophages that are basically garbage collectors, and they start scooping up this debris and congestion, but they break it up with potent acid and free radicals. So in the initial stages, that creates a lot of swelling and discomfort. So, that's what's happening in your ankle. You've damaged cells, you've damaged tissue, you've created debris, congestion. There may be some reactivated microbes that are scooping up and eating that stuff up. The macrophages come in and, are cleaning up this mess with toxic free radicals. So that's all going on. So if that's happening throughout your body, that means you've got whole body cellular stress, increased die-off of cells, reactivation of microbes, overactivity of the immune system, and connections to illnesses like like Lyme disease, the microbes in these chronic things, the microbes are already there. I had been carrying the microbes in my tissues since I was a kid. I got bitten by ticks all the time. So when my cells were stressed, they started reactivating. They started damaging my cells, breaking them down, creating debris, congestion, and the immune system comes in. And then the microbes actually invade our white blood cells and affect chemical messengers called cytokines to increase that process, because more free radical and acid, that breaks down more tissues, that makes more food. And that's what chronic inflammation is. So our anti-inflammatory drugs are basically blocking the immune system from producing those free radicals and other things that can be damaging, but they're also blocking the recovery process. They're blocking healing. That's why when you hear about all these drugs for like rheumatoid arthritis or whatever, it's got the fine print at the end that they read is increased risk of cancer, blah, 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 blah. Well, that's because you're impairing healing every time you use one of those drugs. So what the herbs are doing is suppressing the microbes, neutralizing the free radicals, balancing. I just finished this morning. I was looking at some of our products and the effect that they have on immune cytokines and how they calm those inflammatory cytokines down. So the herbs are doing everything that you want to neutralize that inflammation process and get you back to cellular health. So the root of it is always, always, always cellular stress. Always cellular stress.
So let me ask you a question about that, because I've noticed that there's this, if for your term, uptick in like autoimmune, like my Graves' disease. It's autoimmune. Your immune system just turned on itself and we don't know why. Do you know what I'm saying? But that's what I heard. I mean, that's probably been 20 years ago now.
Okay, so let's think about it a different way. So throughout your lifetime, you're exposed to viruses, maybe bacteria from a tick bite, all these low-grade pathogens that enter your body from the time you start putting stuff in your mouth. Epstein-Barr's, mycoplasmas, sometimes things from intimate contact with other people like ureaplasmas and mycoplasmas, chlamydias, all these microbes that are low-grade pathogens that typically don't make you very sick, but some of them slip past your immune system. And when they do, they invade your cells. Now, if your cells are healthy, and like when you're young, like when you're in your 20s and you're getting all these things, your cells are healthy. Your cells are actually part of your defense system. Healthy cells can prevent invasion of microbes or kill microbes, but microbes have this survival mechanism, and it's called dormancy. 60% of the microbes, the microbe mass on Earth at any given point in time is dormant. So if conditions aren't just right for a microbe, it can just go dormant. It can just go quiet in a quiescent state that is just kind of sitting there. And it does that. So we pick up things that they invade our cells, they become part of our tissues throughout of our body, but they're dormant. Cell keeps right on working perfectly normally, like it was not even there, as long as the cell is healthy. But you stress your cells, 20 years of not sleeping, bad food, all of these stress factors that we're under, then these things emerge. And when they do, they start creating an environment. They start breaking down cells and tissues to generate food for more microbes. And as that's happening, you have that congestion, that debris, that inflammation. But at the same time, your immune system is looking at this and going, oh no, we've got all these microbes emerging from cells. We need to attack those cells. And that's what it does. So there's an autoimmune component in every chronic illness, and it only gets it's only when it gets to a really high level that we define it as an autoimmune disease. But it can happen in specific areas of the body. So whatever microbes we pick up, they may emerge just from our thyroid or just from our heart or just, random areas in the body, and the body starts attacking those things.
Mm-hmm.
So that mechanism has been defined for a lot of illnesses. That's what happens with type 1 diabetes. Microbes, it's associated with a virus infection, and probably not just one virus. It can be a range of different things. But a virus invades the beta cells of the pancreas, and the microbes emerge, and the body attacks them and destroys all of those beta cells because we don't have that many of them. So we're starting to be able to define that for a lot of other chronic illnesses. Mainstream medicine, they're way behind on this because we don't have any drugs that'll fix it. They have nothing in their toolbox for this. So they keep doing the same thing of treating the manifestations of illness instead of getting to those underlying causes. But where I am, where the scientific literature is looking at this concept of this dormant tissue and blood microbiome, and recognizing how much of how big an impact, how elegant a solution it is. No matter what illness you want to explain, it does so. Now, we've got a long way before we completely understand it. We don't necessarily know which microbes are associated with which illness, but try to explain MS or Hashimoto's or Graves, or really any kind of chronic illness, dementia, Parkinson's, without that microbe component as a possible explanation, and you're going to fall short every time. But you add that in, and it starts to make sense. And we don't have any drugs to fix it. But herbs could really do wonderful things for us. But even bigger, herbs can prevent this from ever happening. So I think it's important for people to take a basic regimen of herbs like turmeric and rhodiola and some basic kinds of things every day. I think it's just really remarkably important.
It's a maintenance support system. It's a shift from medicine. It's a shift from Band-Aid, like as I'm listening to you talk, it's more of a shift in lifestyle and the way that we view our health. It's a support system for what our body needs as it ages, is kind of how I'm hearing it.
There's nothing that can balance your microbiome, protect your cells, and do the things that you need to do better than herbs. Now, you have to do your part with diet and lifestyle and everything else. But, once again, drugs treat manifestations of illness. Herbs address the underlying causes, and sometimes you need both. Mm-hmm. But one without the other is not going to, and without that foundation of herbs, you're not going to get where you need to be. And you can make an argument for that. That's what's really missing in our diet. So for hundreds of thousands of years, humans ate a foraged food diet. We ate, and about 2/3 of that was wild plants, berries, leaves, roots. It was essentially the same thing that we're using with herbal therapy. Humans ate that for thousands of years. And then we started farming about 10,000 years and shifted to beans and seeds, which don't have that phytochemistry. And we started cultivating our food. And when we started cultivating our food, we cultivated the food to produce calories, not protective phytochemicals. So our food plants, even our healthy food plants like broccoli and celery and all these things, don't have the concentration of phytochemicals that wild plants do, because we've cultivated that plant to produce calories, and it's lost the ability to protect itself. So our food plants have the lowest potential for helping us in this regard. So that's why herbal supplements are the most practical way to get that back, because we're just not going to go back to a life of foraging. Taking herbs replaces that really important thing that we're missing from our ancestral diets.
Well, I think all of this is so fascinating, and I love the science behind it. And I do feel very passionately about us be taking control of our health and not just going in for a Band-Aid. I feel very passionately about that. I shared with you, and my audience has heard me say, I was the medical power of attorney for my mother-in-law. We went through some very dramatic health things with her, especially the last 4 months of her life. And I was in constant contact with the doctors, and I was frustrated. Even though there was one doctor who was fantastic, he called me. I was on the road, and he made sure to get a hold of me because he knew I was traveling and that I needed to talk to him every day. So as the doctors rotated, I would get these different doctors throughout this time. And I appreciated his letting me know what the symptoms are, letting me know what his diagnosis were, but we didn't have answers. And I think this is the frustration for me. And now I'm caring for my mom's medical needs, and we have a doctor's appointment tomorrow. And it's like things go wrong, or her toe's doing something weird. They give her an antibiotic and they send her out the door. And I get so frustrated I know that they're well-meaning, and I don't want to be a doctor basher, but the system is not healthcare.
Right.
And so I'm glad that you came on, because I want to open up the conversation around what really is health, what really is healthcare, and what can we do without having to go through the testing and the lack of answers. My mom, we went to emergency. I realized when we left, I have no answers. I have another prescription. And so I don't want to be that person who's knocking doctors' butt. I appreciate that you have taken your challenge and you have brought a protocol that is long-term going to create actual healthcare. And I appreciate that. If you had to give people like 3 things to kind of, or if you have 4, I don't mind. I'm just saying some things to begin the process, to anchor themselves into this, because this really is, I mean, you're a doctor, you're an educated man, and look how long you've studied this. And here we are going, okay, well, here's a book and a 1-hour conversation. What 3 kind of starting points can you give people to help them move toward this cellular wellness?
Yeah, well, it's that concept of cellular wellness. Your body is made exclusively of cells. If you have symptoms, they are rooted in cellular stress. The most important thing you can do, aside from, eating a good diet and lifestyle, the most important thing that you can do to protect your cells and keep your cells healthy is take a regimen of herbs every day. Yep. Really important.
How do you know which herbs are there kind of like, I guess, fundamental herbs that everybody can take that will get this journey started for them? Or is it specialized like a prescription?
Well, it's in the company that we do have some basic products just on that entry level to start people out with high grade extracts and the right combination of herbs. So what we're looking for taking on a daily basis is herbs that don't have drug-like properties. So there are some herbs that have more drug-like properties, and the more it's like a drug, the less I have a tendency to use it. So I'm looking at herbs that mainly have this protective effect that you can take every day. They don't have drug-like effects. They don't, they're not going to have side effects. They basically just make you feel well. And there are a lot of those herbs out there, but in the book, I categorize some of my favorites.
Okay.
And we do have those in a product called Daily Herbal, and combined with another one called Daily Multi for people who really feel like they want to take a multivitamin every day. Those 2 products together give people a good foundation to build on.
Question for you. Vitamins versus supplements.
Yeah.
Are they beneficial, or would you suggest that possibly shift? Well, there's herbal supplements. Right. There are herbal supplements. Would it be an idea to look to herbs as the bulk of that support system?
Yeah, I've been trying to preach that message for a long time. Half the population takes a multivitamin every day, even though the evidence that we should be taking a multivitamin is pretty sparse. So I'd like to differentiate between the two because, a lot of people are taking what I would define as nutrients. So nutrients are things that your cells need to function. You need carbohydrates, fats, and proteins or amino acids, but you also need vitamins and minerals that are cofactors for your cells to do the functions that they do, to do their job. And cells need nutrients, but they can only take so many nutrients. So, you don't want to overload your cells. The best way to get nutrients is a well-rounded diet, because those cells, a whole food diet is made of whole cells, and that's going to give you, those broken down cells are going to give you all the nutrients that your cells need to function. So that's the first place to get it. That should be your foundation of nutritional support is a good whole food diet. That being said, when your cells are chronically stressed, they need more nutrients. So sometimes taking a little bit extra, and this is especially important for people with any kind of chronic illness that they're struggling with. Getting those extra nutrients can really be beneficial at certain times. What's wrong with most multivitamins, though, is they're giving it in a form that the body can't readily utilize. It's got to convert it into something else. So, it's in our products, we're using what are called bioavailable nutrients, vitamins and minerals that are in a form that the body can readily assimilate and use. And that's not true of your average daily product out there. So there's value, but let's look at the herbs. So when we take an herbal supplement, we're not getting nutrients. Herbal preparations are nutrient deficient. They don't have vitamins, minerals, carbohydrates, amino acids. None of that is in there. All they have is these protective phytochemicals. And what these phytochemicals are doing is protecting our cells from stress, from all these stress factors that I described, right? So, but interestingly, if your cells are stressed, they're working harder, they're burning through more nutrients. So if you reduce cellular stress by taking herbs, you're actually reducing the nutrient demands on your cells. So one over the other, the reducing cellular stress is really important. And taking a multivitamin isn't going to do anything significant to reduce cellular stress. So if you can reduce cellular stress with the herbs, then your nutrient demand, your need for a multivitamin is less. Now, it won't hurt you to take a multivitamin, but of the two, the herbs are going to give you the most good, no doubt. That's just, there's just any way you want to argue it, the herbs are going to win.
Interesting. So how can people get a hold of these resources? What is your website? What's the name of your resources? I'm assuming it's Vital Plan, but go ahead and let us know how we can get a hold of your resources.
Vitalplan.com is the website, Vital Plan. And you can find me there. And that's the easiest place to find out about products that I have. The book is for sale there. You can find the book on Amazon and all the regular outlets too. But I put a lot of written content out there. I have another website called rawlsmd.com that also has more technical information about different kinds of chronic illnesses. So it kind of depends on what you're looking for.
Okay. Well, Bill, I want to thank you so much for being on the show today. You're such a wealth of information, and what an incredible primer. I mean, it was deep, don't get me wrong, but what an incredible primer this is to this place that we find ourselves in trying to figure out what is wellness. It's such a tossed around term, and I'm so grateful for your insight, your wisdom, your knowledge, this resource that is out there for us to tap into. So I really appreciate your time today, Bill.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. It's been a real pleasure.
Yes. And I have to say that this message that Bill is sharing today is such an important thing to share. So before I get into my outro, I really want to encourage you to take this conversation and share it with your friends. If you're on YouTube, just look down below and the links will be there for you so you can get to him quickly. If you're not able to, you can also go to www.feminineroadmap.com/episode 357. I will have links there to the resources and the website. Friends, I'm pleading with you from a passionate place. Our health determines the quality of our lives. And if what we can learn for ourselves, take control of our own health and wellness, not that we don't go to the doctor, but think about yourself as your own most powerful advocate to what feels good to you, because only you know what your body is going through. So I encourage you to delve into these resources and to figure out if you're in a place of unwellness, unhealth, there's hope. I want to encourage you that we do not have to age poorly. We do not have to struggle. Not that struggle doesn't happen, but there are tools and resources out there that we can use to empower our bodies and our minds to age in a way that feels good and is more healthy. Friends, thank you so much for joining us today. I look forward to sharing more inspirational people, conversations, and strategies with you in the weeks to come. Take care, my friends. Bye-bye.